Welcome to Epik Narratives. In today's video, somebody gets fired because of their boss's own gambling addiction. This happened way back in the dark ages of 1986. I was 21 at the time and working for a gas station that was associated with a certain grocery store chain in Washington state. It was owned by a company not affiliated with said chain, but it had locations at nearly every single one. And this was long before the day of debit cards. This was a cash-only gas station. We didn't even take credit cards. Customers would simply pull up, pump their gas, and then come to my window to pay. We also sold some cigarettes, but no drinks, no snacks, and customers couldn't even get into my booth. I'd been working there for about a year when the company announced it was closing the location. My manager and I were offered positions at another location upstate, and we both accepted. We moved our respective families and started our new jobs, as new hires of course. This station was incredibly busy. We did more business in 8 hours than my old location would do in an entire week. This location also had a different setup than ours. Here you would pull into the station from a single entrance, pump your gas, and then drive forward to a single exit where the pay here booth was located. There were always 2 cashiers on duty. Each cashier had a cash drawer. One thing I should note, there were also no computers, so closing the drawer down between shifts was time consuming and very tedious. We had to manually count the cigarettes remaining and count the cash drawers. We would fill out an end of shift report listing the starting balances and the ending balances. We also had to list the gallons sold from each pump. At the end of the shift, the total of gallons sold and the total cigarettes sold should equal the cash balance. It is important to note that not once in the year had I worked for the previous location had I been off by more than 10 cents. The following morning after my first shift, I was informed by the manager that I was short $50. Impossible, I said. I balanced out yesterday. He said I must have stolen that money after I had completed the paperwork. I just looked at him and said, no, I didn't. He gave me a verbal warning and said if it happened again, I would just be fired and that the stolen money would be deducted from my paycheck next week. In the 5 days that followed, I realized quickly that the manager was up to something. My old manager, who is just another worker now, was also accused of stealing, as was one other new employee. I can't vouch for the other employee, but I'm pretty sure she did nothing wrong. The employees that had been there a while were never accused of anything. I did some checking and found out this manager was relatively new. He had only been working there for about 6 months, and the other cashiers had been there before him. Only new cashiers and workers were being accused of stealing. Additionally, that location had been having stealing problems for about 6 months, and the turnover was very high with new employees. So I came to work at 6 a.m. on a Monday, only to be told I was being fired. Because the manager accused me of taking $500 out of my drawer the previous Friday. He said he only discovered it this morning, even though he had worked both Saturday and Sunday. I just said okay and left. I was pretty angry, and instead of going home, I just parked in the grocery store parking lot across the street and proceeded to settle in to watch the gas station. I knew that at 9 a.m. sharp, he would take the cash in the safe and make the weekend deposit. At 9 a.m., he left the gas station and headed right to the bank. But instead of walking into the bank, he walked into the Indian casino next door. It's not really a casino like we think of today, more of a betting parlor for the races. It did have slot machines, but no card tables. I think, well, this is interesting. He comes out of the casino at exactly 10 a.m., walks next door to the bank, does his business, and then heads back to the gas station. I head home with a plan. Every morning I follow him from the gas station to the casino. I take a picture of him leaving, and one of him arriving at the bank, and then one walking into the casino. I take pictures of him coming out and then heading back into the bank. I do this for 5 days straight. He even went on Saturday. On day 3, my old manager was even fired for stealing $150. I get the film developed. Yeah, there were no digital cameras back in the dark ages. And note the times and dates on the back of each one. Then, I call the main office of the gas company. It's after 5, but I'm hoping someone's there. And oh boy, was there. I speak to a woman and explain my situation, and she knows exactly who I need to speak with and transfers me promptly. By the grace of God, she has transferred me to none other than the president/CEO of the company. I tell him my story and tell him I did not steal anything from his company and could prove who actually did. He took down my information and said he would be in touch. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right. The next morning, I went to the station to perform my usual observation of the manager. At 9 a.m., he leaves for the bank, and at 10 a.m., he comes out. At that moment, two stern-looking gentlemen approached him. One pulled out his wallet and shows him something, and the other one is talking. The manager goes pale and takes a step back. Next thing I know, he's being escorted to a car I hadn't noticed, and they drive off. I lose them at a traffic signal, so I head back to the station. They all show back up about 5 minutes later, and a few minutes after that, a police cruiser pulls in. The officer talks to the stern gentleman and proceeds to place the manager in handcuffs. The other man says nothing, but is glaring daggers at the manager. The president called me later that afternoon and had informed me that the manager had been arrested for embezzlement. Turns out that in 6 months he had managed to steal about $5,000. He would take the store cash into the casino and gamble with it. And if he won, he would make the normal bank deposit and keep the profits. And if he lost, he would make the deposit and note his records that he had been short the previous day. The CEO had already been focusing on that location because of the stealing and very high turnover rate, but my information helped them figure out exactly what had been going on. I had been thanked and sent a substantial check as a reward. My old manager was offered the manager's job, and I was offered my old job back as well. I had declined though, as I had already found another job that I liked more and had paid better. The gambling manager was sentenced to an entire year in jail in order to attend counseling for his gambling addiction. His wife divorced him and took their 3 children to California. His house was foreclosed and he ended up in a homeless shelter. So don't accuse me of stealing. I will get revenge. Our next story ends up with the victim's house almost burning down. A friend of mine used to install wood stoves and sell firewood. He still sells the firewood, but stopped bothering with the wood stoves for whatever reason. This one guy bought a wood stove from him and wanted it installed, as most do. My friend did this, but told him he would need to get a higher chimney for better air drawing, to keep the flame going and not throw smoke into the living room. The guy refused it. I'm assuming maybe he didn't want a higher chimney for the look, and my friend kept insisting. The owner said no, and what a surprise it was when the wood stove was installed and running. He complained it was hard to get a fire going, due to the chimney being too short and leading to a poor drawing of air. My friend came with the chimney extension and it worked fine, but he decided he didn't want to pay still, even though the job was done and done very well. So a few weeks later, my friend was passing through the area and saw nobody was home, but there was a fire going to keep the house warm. The owner must have been at work or something. Well, my friend decided to climb up onto the roof and get his chimney extension back, rightfully so in my opinion. It was a plus, but not enough to cover everything that was installed and the time he had put in. Where things get kind of funny is that once he had taken the extension off of the chimney, due to poor air drawing, the house actually started to fill up with smoke as the fire continued to burn. The owner must have come home to a thick, smoke-filled home. Try to get that smell out of everything. Probably a layer of soot on everything he owned. To my recollection, the owner did not have any pets, so no lives were harmed in this. But when everything you own is black and reeks like smoke, and your home is freezing cold in the middle of winter, I bet you would rather have paid somebody for their products and services instead of being cheap. Our final story involves a victim who lost several thousands of dollars because he wouldn't pay somebody a couple hundred. A few years after I had started my business, I was asked to clean up and optimize a number of PCs in multiple locations, as well as set up some forms and templates for a new client who owned a local restaurant. The work, all label apart from a little travel, was performed over the space of a month due to scheduling conflicts and school holidays, but upon completing the last of it, the client had confirmed verbally that he was happy with all I had done, and to go ahead and send an invoice. I duly emailed an invoice for a sum just in excess of 400 euros. I waited for payment, never heard anything, sent reminder emails, called and left messages, but absolutely no response. Eventually, a couple of busy months had passed, and I had met the client by chance in the local supermarket. Upon asking why he had not paid or been in touch with me, he said that all the PCs were as bad as they had been before I had started, and that he had tried to contact me with no success. As both my landline and mobile phone had color display as well as answering services, there had been no emails. I knew the latter was BS. And as many PC users know, a system can easily go back to crap if the user has bad habits and doesn't change them. So I contacted a local debt collector, gave him the details, printouts of my call logs and post-invoicing emails, and he took them to the restaurateur. On his return, his words were, he's not disputing the invoice, he's saying that the work wasn't done right, so it's essentially his word against yours. I had asked him if it was even worth taking the guy to small claims court, to which the debt collector said, Even if you could prove he confirmed that he was satisfied with the work you did, they might insist you get his computers back to their pre-invoice state again. Do you really want to spend more time doing any of that stuff? Of course the answer was no, so I stewed over it and came up with another plan. At this point, it was late November, so creating 2 throwaway email accounts in female names, I got in touch with the restaurant to book a large party for Valentine's night the following February. I put it down as my husband's surprise 40th birthday party. Confirmed that my husband's sister, and of course I CC'd her in the message with the other throwaway, couldn't make the journey north, but would happily pay the £10 head deposit as her share towards the night. Of course, as time went on, ideas grew arms and legs. The numbers attending increased until the owner suggested he'd reserve the whole restaurant for the evening, and they'd happily arrange seating to suit us. But I needed to ensure that the deposit was sorted as soon as possible. Of course, I confirmed that the sister was a scatterbrain and that I'd ensure the check was with him very soon. He emailed the sister using the CC address and she confirmed that it had been posted. To keep him on side, I asked for a proposed menu in advance so that I could send it to all the attendees for pre-ordering. Naturally, they were very delighted because they know that this makes their life much, much easier the night of. Eventually, the numbers for all 3 courses were emailed in, with a few fussy eater variables thrown in for good measure. Needless to say, by the beginning of February, he was getting quite antsy about there being no sign of the deposit, but I reassured him that the sister check must have been lost in the post, so she'd send another by special delivery if they could ensure someone was there to sign for it. I knew the owner lived about 25 miles away, and the restaurant didn't open until 5 p.m., so he'd have to come in very early and hang around to wait for it. A week before D-Day, or Valentine's Day I guess, and he'd obviously had enough. He emailed in a spat saying that they had turned away numerous inquiries, had no deposit, and could no longer hold back on taking other bookings. This time, I didn't even bother replying. My part was done. My wife, at the time, and I were booked in another restaurant close by for our own Valentine's meal, after which we took a special walk past the restaurant's business premises to see just 2 cars in their parking lot, one of which was the owner's. I'm not sure how much he must have lost out on that night, but knowing his prices, I bet it was significantly more than the 400 euros I'd invoiced him. Of course, lessons were learned by me too. Get written or emailed confirmation of job satisfaction for one, and not letting new clients go unbilled for too long was another. Naturally, I had no hesitation for letting everybody know how he had behaved, so he was blacklisted or forced to pay upfront for any work by IT and other professionals I knew locally.